Oh, hello there. Yes. Well, after the Trump grazing, there's quite a lot in the media about violent rhetoric and how bad it is, and the reason why the shooter, who may or may not have been a far-left member of Antifa or simply somebody who made a one-off donation to Biden, depending on your viewpoint, obviously. One of those two is absolutely true, by the way. Anyway, yes, violent rhetoric, which probably spurred them to end up being shot on a roof somewhere in America, the way that people are on a regular basis, but we'll come back to that one. Anyway, yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about toning down violent rhetoric, but as ever with the right-wing British press, because it is right-wing, I don't really want to hear arguments that it isn't. Please, it's just so dull. Please, it is just so dull. Anyway, we end up with some fine examples, and I just want to quote one of them here, which is Jake Wallace-Simmons, yes, Jewish writer for the Daily Telegraph. No, I'm not being racist by pointing out he's Jewish. That's actually very, very relevant. Anyway, he writes this, okay? Violent rhetoric is poisoned US politics made attack inevitable. Yes, you see, them people saying things has made the bloke who's definitely a member of Antifa or made a one-off donation. Anyway, yes, take a pot shot at possible president. Yes, Nazi comparisons, which would be greeted with a furious offence if they came from the other way, have become commonplace amongst the left. Yes, you see, it's all my fault that people go on roofs and do things in the USA, or indeed anywhere, because although people on the right use vastly inflated violent rhetoric, just look at any Republican senator and their campaign ads, which invariably involve them standing there with firearms blowing things up. But, obviously that's just me for being a lefty. Anyway, let's just quote one little bit from Jake, okay? The Republican nominee is hardly innocent of using aggressive rhetoric himself. Small amount of balance there. Of course. After losing the election in 2020, his rabble-rousing speeches were blamed, rightly or wrongly, for the insurrection on Capitol Hill. In 2020, ABC News claimed to have found 54 cases in which he inspired violence and threats, including a plot to bomb a block of flats in Kansas that had many Muslim residents. Yes, words have consequences, etc., etc., etc. There is a particular tolerance, however, for venom from prominent figures on the left. Now might be a good time for a reckoning. Indeed. Yes, so all that violent rhetoric will lead to violence. But the problem I have with Jake, you see, is basically that Jake is an apologist for the actions of the Israeli state. He acts as a Zionist in the British press, soft-soaping lack of, one might say, violent rhetoric about what's going on. So when you look back at his recent past articles in the Daily Telegraph, you end up with this lot, which is all basically sort of soft soaping and making it okay the mutilation of tens of thousands of innocent civilians, in particular children. His violent rhetoric isn't there. And yet one of those two things, in terms of violent rhetoric, saying that you're angry about something, perhaps quite rightly, is kind of labelled as somehow deviant, and yet soft-soaping, or indeed acting as an apologist for a genocidal regime, is just one of those things that's fine for him to do. And I find that really distasteful, but that's just because, I'm one of them thinking human beings. And the problem I have with all of this, of course, is that, let's say every single left-winger stopped using any form of violent rhetoric, which is quite hard because we tend to talk about struggles in life, come back to that concept in just a second. Then how do we explain the fact that so far this year, about getting close to, I don't know, the last time I counted it was 400 people, right, who have died in mass shootings in the US. Was that all due to some Democratic senator who used quite strong language last week or something? I don't think so. Violent societies that are formed and based on violence tend to, drumroll, become violent, okay? And economic systems that are violent will do the same thing. Economic violence is built into the capitalist system. Just going to be Marxist there suddenly. Ooh, that was a bit left field, wasn't it? Yeah. And it's built into the system. Right, okay, that's the way those things work. And if you protest that, even in a non-violent way, you will end up behind bars. Not just sort of being gently people wagging their fingers at you, yeah, or people going, oh, I think that was a bit strong. You know, when you post images of people being killed in campaign ads or whatever it might be, but actually real lives being affected, or indeed real lives being ripped apart by British supplied weapons that have been dropped from Israeli planes. Now, one of those two things I find morally absolutely repugnant. Okay? Yeah, you can look up whoever you want, but don't blame these people if they get a bit tetchy about it and write it. For God's sake, that isn't the violence in the system. The violence is the system. And I think more people need to say that to people like Jake, or indeed our present government, who are continuing to meet violence, albeit at a third-party level, against vast numbers of people in the world. Such is the nature of British foreign policy, eh? Still, the empire wasn't that bad, and we got rid of slavery, so I suppose that makes it all right. Anyway, again, I think I am becoming more vitriolic, aren't I? Yes, I better watch that language. I don't know what you lot and what you people might do. You might start going out and bombing innocent civilians. Well, that's very unlikely, isn't it? Yes. Anyway, do have a lovely one, but do think about that, okay? Okay, you can read Zizek on violence if you like. Okay, he goes into that very, very much. The state is allowed to be violent. Individuals, it becomes a pathological issue. And with Jake, it's definitely pathological, as well as ideological, as well as just very distasteful. Anyway, do have a lovely, if you can, Tuesday.